story that I'm going to read to you. Another thing I want to say about this next story is I always liked this little story, but I didn't really know why it should be in the book. And let me say, if you ever think about writing, those stories that you remember are important because, of course, we don't remember everything. So why does God have you remember certain things? So if you're doing any writing, I'd encourage you to think about that. Why do you remember the stories you remember? That's how it was with this story. I wanted to use it, but I didn't know why. So I talked to Lori about it. She said, well, go home and pray about it and see what God tells you. And as I did that, I realized that this is a story of hope. This is a way that God helped me to continue to have hope. And so let me read this story of hope from the book. And this starts out with being at St. Mary's School in Lincoln, Catholic school. Another good thing about going to this school was going to Mass every morning before school started. I also went through catechism that year. I don't know if they asked me or if all the fourth graders went through it, but we went to separate classes and we learned more about the Bible than we did in school. The main thing I remember were the prayers. Our Father, Hail Mary, and the Apostles' Creed. The Apostles' Creed stood out for me the most, especially the part that said, Jesus suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. He descended into hell. The third day he rose and he ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father. Jesus had suffered greatly and was even in hell. I could relate to this. I was suffering too. This was the first time I really understood about Jesus dying on the cross and what that meant. Also, that a miracle had happened in his life. He rose from the dead. I needed a miracle too. Would believing in Jesus bring me a miracle? I knew if my life was going to be saved, I needed something bigger than me. I needed God. So I accepted what they were teaching me and I hung on to the hope, that the belief that God would save me. This hope for a miracle came about in an interesting way one Sunday afternoon and involved my favorite food, candy. There was a Russell Stover's candy factory in Lincoln at the time, and I had often passed it longingly looking at the display candy in the window. As a kid, I never realized that this candy was only for display and that it wasn't real. One afternoon, when I again had to stay with Boo Boo, now this is a man, he was in another chapter, and he was a friend of Josephine's boyfriend. They both worked on the garbage truck together, so that's Boo Boo. So I had to stay with Boo Boo, and he told me that he had a special treat for me. When he showed me this box of candy, I was overjoyed. Wow, here was this whole box of candy, this wonderful candy that I had so often seen in the factory window, and it was just for me. But as I took a piece from the box and I tried to take that first yummy sweet bite, I was sadly disappointed. I kept trying, thinking, well, maybe this candy is just a little bit old, and so the outer coating is hard. But I soon understood there was something very wrong with this candy. When Boo Boo realized that I'd figured out it wasn't normal candy, he laughed. He told me it was fake candy, used only for display, and that he had found it in the trash. Gross, he found it in the trash and I was putting it in my mouth? Then I felt sad. What I thought was going to be a wonderful treat was just another lie. But that whole afternoon, I couldn't accept the fact that that candy wasn't real. I sat there thinking about it, thinking that if I just looked hard enough and that if I just believed strong enough, that that candy would become real. It didn't, but I never forgot that candy. What I wanted was a miracle. Now, for fake candy to become real truly would have been a miracle. However, the miracle I needed and wanted was not about candy at all. It was about my life and my family. I wanted to have a family again. I wanted Pat to come home, and I wanted Josephine to straighten up and be my mom. This was the miracle I needed. I wanted to be safe and loved and valued by the adults in my life. I did not know it then, but looking back, I believe that God was there with me that afternoon. He gave me the ability to keep hoping, the ability to pray for a miracle. And even though the miracle would not come that day, God was whispering in my ear, keep going, the good will come. One day you will have all these things you so long for now. The hard times are not over, but hang on a little longer. There is hope, and remember, I am walking beside you. And so that was a powerful story of hope for me. Now I want to share with you some other people that brought hope into my life, that represented Jesus in my life. And let me say too that, not everyone can be a foster parent like my parents were. But these people, the schools, the teachers, and the people that I'm going to talk about now, they did what God called them to do. So whatever God is calling you to do in the life of a child is important. You don't have to do a huge, big thing. You don't have to be a foster parent. But whatever you can do is important. So this is my Aunt Donna, and she was not a biological aunt. She had been married to Josephine's brother, and they were divorced. So really, she did not have to be a part of our family at all. But she was. She was always there for us. Whenever we got into trouble and our family had many needs, we would always call Aunt Donna. When Frank died, we went to Aunt Donna. When Pat left, he and I actually ran away. We went to Aunt Donna's house. So she was a person that was always there, and that was a protective factor to know that there was someone stable out there that I could count on. And if you read the book, Aunt Donna is really one of the heroes in the book. Well, as I said before, teachers were also very important. They were women who were clean, they were smart, they had a job, they dressed nicely, they were good role models for me. And, I never thought that, as a child, I never thought that I could become a teacher. That just felt way out of my, what I could do. But I did become a teacher. I have a master's degree in education, and I taught for all these years. So they planted that seed, and then other people watered it and helped that grow. So teachers were an important part of my life. Cedars Children's Home, that was also a very important part of my childhood. It was very difficult to go there. It was very scary being taken away from Josephine and going to this new place, but it was a safe place. I didn't fear that people were going to hurt me there. There was consistency. It was clean. There was food. I knew that I could expect food every day. And they set boundaries for me. We had our jobs to do and different chores, and that helped me a lot too, to have consistency and boundaries. Living with Josephine that last year, I'd become a pretty wild child. I could just run the streets and do whatever I wanted, so having that consistency was good. But let me also say that being at Cedars was probably the worst time in my life too. Not because of anything they did, but because when I was at Cedars, I didn't have a family. And for a child to not have a place to belong is a really horrible place to be. I wanted to go back and live with Josephine, but I didn't want to live with her in the way she was living and all the men that were in her life. I knew that. I wanted her to straighten up, but I knew I didn't want to go back and live with her the way she was living. And so I didn't know where I was going to go, and that was a really hard time in my life. Another important place in my life was my home church, Bellwood Mennonite Church in Milford, Nebraska. That was a wonderful place for me. They took this poor, broken child, and they loved me, and they cared about me, and they helped me see that I was a beloved child of God. They helped me change this identity of being someone poor and insignificant that people really didn't want to be around. They helped me change the identity of a female that was used by men. They helped me understand that I was a beloved child of God, and that started the strong faith that I have today. And again, they probably didn't think they were doing anything special or important, but just loving and caring about me was what I needed and what God was calling them to do. And now we're going to go into the miracle part of this. And the people who helped bring about this miracle were, of course, my mom and dad, Floyd and Irma Burkey. They are the true heroes of this story. And so I'm going to share a story with you about the first time I met them when they came to Cedars. And this was the first time I met them, and how that was the day this miracle started. And this story starts in one chapter and goes into the next. So this is the last thing that I'll read. This next chapter in my life was already being prepared. Even though I didn't know it, God was working in my life, preparing a place for me. God was working in the hearts and minds of a couple in Milford, Nebraska. He was giving them the desire and longing to take in a child. Of course, they masked it in practical terms. Oh, they needed someone to help with the housework and the cleaning. But if that was their only wish, they could have easily hired someone for that. No, God was tugging at their hearts, planting the seed that would become my hope and salvation. And then the next chapter, titled, They Wanted a Little Girl. In the fall of 1970, I started 5th grade at Park Elementary. All the elementary children at Cedars got on the bus each morning and headed off to school. Mr. Frobel was my teacher. He was nice, not anything special, but a good person. One fall day, I got off the bus at Cedars and I was ready to relax. But Alberta called me into her office where 2 people were sitting. I wondered who they were and why they were there. This is Mr. and Mrs. Burkey, Alberta said. Mr. Burkey held out his hand and I shook it, and then I shook Mrs. Burkey's hand and said hello. I said hello, but I felt shy. Why were these people here, I wondered? What did they want? I didn't know how to act, so I was quiet. How was school today, Mr. Burkey asked. It was fine, I replied. What grade are you in, Mr. Burkey asked. The 5th grade. Mr. Frobel is my teacher. Do you like school, Mrs. Burkey asked. Oh, yes, I like school, I said, trying to sound excited. I knew adults wanted children to enjoy school. We talked for about a half an hour about my school and the children's home and their farm. Alberta had left the room, and when she came back, she asked if I would like to show them my room and the rest of the building. I agreed, and we went on a tour of the place. Because I was feeling more comfortable at Cedars, I knew my way around, and I could explain most things to them. After I showed them everything, we ended up at the front door. I guess we're ready to go, Mr. Burkey said. We were wondering if you'd like to come for a visit, come to visit us for a weekend, Mr. Burkey asked. Sure, I said, that would be fun. I was starting to feel more comfortable with these people, and the thought of visiting their farm sounded like fun. Well, we'll call back and talk to Alberta and see if we can do that, Mr. Burkey said. Alberta nodded, and we all said goodbye. I went back to my room, but I didn't fully realize what had just happened. How could I have known that this one day would be such a huge turning point in my life? How could I have known that all the things I so wanted in my life would start on that day? It seemed like such an ordinary day. How could I have known that when I came back from school, waiting for me in Alberta's office was my miracle? This revelation did not come to me on that day. These new people were nice, but I didn't really think much about their visit. Other girls from the home had invited me to go with them on weekend visits, and I just assumed that people from the community did this for the poor, unfortunate children without families. I had no idea that the Burkeys would be a possible family for me. But they were, and they became my forever family. Now, it wasn't always perfect and it wasn't always easy, but their obedience and faith to God's call completely changed my life and helped me have the life that I have today. And they were also models for me to go out and help people living on the margins, abused children, people that are living in poverty, and others who live on the margins. And writing this book is a part of that too, to help people see, again, what it is like to be such a child. So thank you so much for letting me come here today and talk to you about my life. Thank you. Yeah, any questions, or do we have time?
Yes, let's get a mic, and if you have a question, we have just a little bit of time. Anybody have a question?
What is your relationship with your brother now?
He died in 2010, and I did not have a relationship with him. And that was a difficult thing in my life, and I would often ask counsel of people, you know, like my small group and stuff, if I should get in contact with him. And the answer was always no. When Josephine died in 1990, I did go back and connect with the family then, and I realized that Pat had not changed. He was alcoholic. Several of his children, he had 4 children, 3 of them had been taken away from him. So he was not as lucky as I was. He did not break the cycle. And also, I knew that he would never have access to my daughters. I was not going to let that happen. And with the Wisdom of the Wounded presentation that I do, I talk about the losses. And that's one of the losses of sexual abuse, of poverty also in my life, but also of sexual abuse, that loss of relationship. You know, a brother can be a really good person in your life, but when there's sexual abuse, then that is often, that loss happens.
I hate to cut it short.
I know, I'm
Well,
sorry,
we're
I
not
went
cutting
too
it
long.
short, but no, that's all right. The bell rang.
Yeah, that's
Thank
fine.
you, Kathy, for being vulnerable, telling your story, offering your story, and offering hope, and offering us a challenge of how we as a church, we as teachers, we have foster parents, we have adoptive parents here, we have teachers here, how giving us hope that the work that we do is important,
Yes.
and challenging those of us to find areas that we can connect. Let's end with prayer real quick. God, thank you for Kathy, her story. Thank you for hope. Thank you for miracles. Thank you for your presence and in the many different ways that Kathy experienced it and we experience it. Lord, help us to be your protective arms, your presence of peace as Christ to this world. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. You can come check out the books.